even basically the second year when we had to drag this cow because she didn't want to go where we were going to do it, and she ended up breaking the chain. We had to put it on the floor of that pickup truck. And I saw, gosh, she wants to live just like I would want to live. And I saw that, and I think that's, again, something that's very important for us to remember in general, is that animals like us have a yearning to live their lives. There's nothing worse we can do than to take that away from them, and to confine them, and steal their purposes, and to kill them. And so they've always resisted from the very beginning of this whole thing of killing them for food. But I saw all that, but I couldn't really deal with it. I couldn't really question anything. So I went away to college. I remember hearing that there were some vegetarians on the campus. This was in Maine, in Colby College, but I never really met one. And I decided eventually, anyway, to after I graduated from college, to go to California and to try to find cosmic consciousness. This was back in 1975 when things were really happening in San Francisco, and I got as far as Buffalo, New York with my brother, and we were hitchhiking and working our way west, and we decided to head south. And we walked actually all the way from Buffalo down eventually to Tennessee. It took us many months, walking about 15 to 20 miles a day. And we ended up at a place called The Farm in Tennessee, which at that point was the largest hippie commune in the world, and they were eating basically a totally plant-based diet. They called it being vegetarian, but actually it was vegan. And no one heard of that word back in 1975, but there was no meat or dairy products or eggs, and that was it. I never ate meat again in my life, and I found out years later that Madeline in Switzerland, the same month and year, she also became a vegetarian. And we met many years later. And then I eventually got out to San Francisco and lived in Tibetan Buddhist centers and Zen centers and all this, and I eventually became a Zen monk and moved to Korea and lived in a Zen monastery in Korea. And I found myself for the second time in my life in a community of people who did not eat any animal foods. And in fact, they had been living what we would call today a vegan lifestyle for about 650 years, since the 1300s. And there was no meat, no dairy products, no eggs, no wool, no silk, no leather. And it was all because, really, I would say, because of karma. And also, really, the ancient idea of ahimsa. Have you heard of that word, ahimsa? Yeah, non-violence, non-harmfulness. The basic idea is that if I'm harmful to others, if I harm them for my own benefit, then not only do I harm them, but I always harm myself more than I ever harm another. Because essentially harming another for my own benefit, it closes down the possibility that we have to awaken spiritually, emotionally, and intellectually. And it causes us to just decrease our inherent intelligence in doing that. So the whole idea is if we want to grow spiritually and in other ways as human beings, practice nonviolence and compassion for all life. And so to me, the big lesson in all of this that I want to emphasize here, and this I think leads well into our toast, the power of community. The only reason I ate meat, dairy products, and eggs, and I would say the only reason anyone eats meat, dairy products, and eggs is because of the community. I would do it because my mother, my father, my uncle, my aunt, my minister, my teachers, the corporations, the media, the entire community we're born into. It just injects it into us at such a profound and powerful and deep level. It's very hard to question. And I have found, for myself anyway, and I've seen it a lot with others too, that the most powerful way that we can actually break free of this indoctrination program that is definitely not in our best interest is through alternative community, like the farm and Sanghoksa Zen Temple, and this right here, the EarthSave group, because we can come together, we can share recipes, we can talk about our experiences, we can give insights, we can be an example. And that's what allows us to change. So the power of community, I think, is the most important thing. I think really there's two important things. One is the power of community. The other is the power of our own inner yearning to wake up. The inner yearning to know the truth. The inner yearning to unfold our purpose on this planet. The inner yearning to understand why we're here and to live a life of authenticity and meaning. That will get you there too. But having a community is really helpful. And I think these two together, taking time to quiet our minds and to connect with a part of our consciousness that's not been programmed by our culture. Because most of us, as we go through our day, it's just a program. The program of our thoughts that keeps driving us. And so to somehow disconnect from that. And that really, I think when I was in Korea and a lot of other, doing meditation retreats, I think is really help with that. So to really appreciate community, I think, is very important, and I think I'd like to, on that note, turn it over to Jeff, because I think this is what we're going to be doing here.
The fact that we can have Will here and our program next month and so forth started a year ago, October. And I just want to acknowledge EarthSave's partners creating and producing this potluck monthly event. We call it Potluck North. And they are Brooke Katz.
Yay,
And Mort, who does not partake of the grape, which for you, not for you, if you know what I mean. And Maida, who, look what she gave up tonight. Look what she contributed. Her own blood to make this event. I hope she feels better. So I'd like to toast our partners and the people who help produce this event every month, Maida, Mort, and Brooke. And there are others, but tonight, you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So the power of community, and this, I think, more than anything, helps us to awaken our sanity. Have you heard of the saying by Krishnamurti? Krishnamurti said, "It is not a good idea to be well adjusted to a sick society." And I think that's really a key point. You know, we all basically, as human beings, in many ways, we want to be well adjusted, right? We want to fit in, we want to go along, we want everybody to like us. We want to go to the church picnic and eat what everybody's eating, or go to the company barbecue and eat what everybody's eating, and have them, you know, just kind of go along and be part of the crowd. And yet, I think as we start to awaken something in us, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, ethically, intellectually, we begin to go, well, I don't know if I want to go along with this anymore. I don't know if it's a good idea to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And when that happens, I think what happens actually is we begin, instead of relying on what I call the program, which is what has been injected into us from the time we're little children, we begin to rely on our intuition, an inner knowing that can guide us. And that's a great gift that we all have. I think we all have within us our intuition. This inner knowing that, in a sense, I think transcends our cultural conditioning. Because when you think about it, you know, from the time that we're born, if you go into any little, any grocery store and look into the baby food containers, you will see very clearly, it's quite an exercise to see chicken and beef and turkey and these little hot dogs and you know, and cheese and so forth being given to little kids as soon as they lose their mother's breast, which I think 90% don't even get that anymore. They lose their formula. Which, oh gosh, that formula. But anyway, after that, then they start getting this meat, dairy products, and eggs. And so we're totally open as little infants. We trust everything. We just take it in. And so what are we actually eating when we're eating that? We're basically eating and incorporating into ourselves, as little kids growing up, a mentality that is in many ways profoundly antithetical to everything we would really want to achieve in our lives, and that we would want to achieve as a culture. Because when you think about it, when I said at the beginning, we're killing every single day in the United States 75 million animals for food. That's a very conservative estimate, actually. This is a huge machine of killing, and it takes an enormous amount of resources. In fact, I think if someone came from outer space and landed here, they would say, that's what we're doing. You know, it's the most obvious thing. Madeline and I we've been living now in an RV, we call it our little rolling home. We're starting our 17th year. Now full time, we got solar panels on the roof, we get our energy from the sun for running everything, and we travel slowly around North America, but we really see very clearly that most of the land here, really, has been completely enslaved to monocropping, in which we are growing genetically engineered corn and soybeans, courtesy of Monsanto, and it's very, very toxic. I mean, there's nothing worse, I don't think, than this hideous system of monocropping where basically the mentality is a complete war against nature. We have a situation where, literally millions of acres of land, and not one species is allowed to grow other than the species that's been planted. In other words, any other plant that tries to live there, we just attack and kill. Any animals that would try to live there, or even funguses or anything, we attack and kill. So, whereas the earth is trying to just give forth life and trying to balance things and make everything a healthy ecosystem, we have Monsanto, genetically engineered corn and soybeans, and these are primarily to feed animals that are hyper-confined away in stinking sheds who eat most of this grain while people are starving. I mean, the insanity of this system completely boggles the mind. I don't know how we can allow it to go on for one more day. I mean, how can we stand for this insanity to be continuing another day? Think of the fact that we have roughly 1.2 billion of our brothers and sisters starving, while we're growing enough grain on this planet right now to feed between 12 and 15 billion people. More than twice as many people as we have. And yet we have them starving while we're feeding most of the grain to these hyper-confined cows and pigs and chickens and fish. Factory farm fish eat a huge, 2/3 of our fish now are factory farm. They eat huge amounts of grain. And we feed them to cows and pigs and chickens to fatten them up, and to other fish. I mean, the whole system is incredibly perverse, and it causes enormous devastation to the water. It takes huge quantities of water, and it's pollution and destruction of the soil and destabilization of the weather, and the causing of a mass extinction of species. We're in the largest extinction of species in 65 million years, and it's driven entirely by human activity, specifically with the fork of eating animal foods, because that is what is by far the most environmentally devastating practice. And the people on the other end of the bell curve who are paying for this food because they've been basically brainwashed and programmed into thinking that real men eat beef, and that they, in order to be a macho man, they've got to, even though it's very poetic that they need Viagra after all, but that's what they're supposed to do. It's just robotic behavior. I mean, one of the things I realize is that there's no point in getting angry in the sense of people who are eating animal foods, because they're just doing what they're told. They're just doing what they've been told at a very deep, powerful level. So the idea is to understand it's a cultural program. But they are suffering from terrible diseases. Really, I mean, the masses of diseases that enrich what I call the military-industrial, meat, medical, pharmaceutical, media complex, which is a vast complex. There are these diseases. I mean, there's huge profits are going to this complex in actual animal agriculture. Just the Monsanto, the profits there, ConAgra, Cargill, this industrialized killing machine that grows this grain and feeds it to people, and then the huge number of drugs. There's over 10,000 different drugs and hormones and substances that have been approved to be administered to animals who find themselves, unfortunately, born into a system where they're confined from the time they're born, they're stolen from their mothers, they're given a number, and they're hyper-confined in horrific cruelty. Many of them are really driven into insanity by the hyper-confinement. Many pigs, for example, are banging their heads against the bars of cages, just driven really crazy by the horrible cruelty and pain that they're suffering. And inability to even move physically at all. And so there's huge profits in giving all these animals these drugs so they can survive this kind of abuse long enough to be taken off to the slaughterhouse. There's huge profits in the people who eat that stuff, the meat, dairy products, and eggs, who have diseases, the basic diseases that define our culture today, right? Every single one of them is traced to eating high amounts of meat, dairy products, and eggs. Strokes, heart disease, cancers of various kinds, autoimmune diseases, osteoporosis, obesity, liver disease, kidney disease. All of this is really what's happening. How many people are going to the hospital because they have protein deficiency? I mean, it's called kwashiorkor. How many of you have heard of the great kwashiorkor epidemic? No, people are going to hospital because of the exact opposite of that, because there's diseases of excess protein. So this is the situation. I mean, if this isn't what Christian Murray was talking about, a completely insane system. So, but it does work very well to enrich a very few people at the top who get rich for selling all these drugs to these people who need Lipitor and all kinds of whatever drugs that they need for all these diseases. And actually, you're probably aware of this, but the number one largest profit center for the pharmaceutical industries is drugs for psychological illness. Basically depression, anxiety, pain, insomnia. That's where they're making the most money. And the irony again is that what are we doing to these animals? We're forcing them into depression, insomnia, pain, and anxiety and panic. And we find that we eat those foods, and we and our children get the same diseases. And Art's asking me to talk about karma. I mean, basically, the whole world keeps dying. I never use the word karma. I could call it ye profound book on karma. Something like that. Because really, it's about the most fundamental spiritual teaching of all the traditions of the world, which is this. Whatever you most want for yourself, give that to others. That's the basic teaching that every spiritual teacher worth his or her salt has given forth. That whatever we most want for ourselves, to give that to others, that whatever we put out will come back. Well, God is not mocked. Whatever you sow, so shall you reap. Whatever we put out will come back. The golden rule is another expression of this. Do unto others as you would like to have done unto you. This basic teaching, this is in the DNA of our bones. We know this is true. And yet, we're all born into a culture that is so incredibly immature, spiritually and ethically, that we act like that doesn't exist. That we can hyper-confine and mutilate 75 million animals every single day and kill them, and just get away scot-free. That we can cause this kind of massive starvation. We have 20 or 30,000 children dying of starvation every single day, while we're gorging pigs and cows and chickens on all the grain and eating their flesh and secretions. And the incredible inequality of that. And the poor suffering of the workers that have to do this. I always like to include that because I think sometimes we forget that when I take out my wallet and pay in a restaurant for prime rib, and the waitress typically, and when I do that, she doesn't look at me and go, "You monster, how could you possibly pay me to pay